Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. It's probably hard to imagine being more cynical about the news media than you already are. You watch the coverage, you know how totally dishonest it is. You read their tweets, you know how vindictive and unimpressive they are. If one of your kids went to work at CNN, would you even tell your neighbors? You might be tempted to say he was in prison. It's less embarrassing. So it's going to be hard to shock you with more stories about corruption in the news business, but prepare yourself. We've got a new one. Today, an independent journalist called Yashar Ali wrote an account of an experience he just had with NBC News managing director Daphna Linzer. Linzer is a former Washington Post reporter. She now oversees all political coverage for both NBC News and MSNBC. Ali did not expect to be talking to her. He just got on the phone with the Democratic National Committee. He had a scoop about the dates of the first primary debates. Not a big deal, but he wanted to make sure that his facts were right. The DNC confirmed his story, but then asked Ali to delay publishing it. They wanted time to notify their state parties about it first. Ali refused. He doesn't work for the DNC. He just wanted to break his story. That was it. And then he got an unexpected call from Daphna Linzer, again, who works at NBC News. Here's Ali's account of what happened next. Quote, "She asked if I could hold the story, and I said I couldn't. She was agitated. Why not? I said I'm not going to lose a scoop. And then she got angrier and said, why not? It's not a big deal. Let them make a few phone calls." My jaw dropped. I realized that Daphna Linzer, the head of all political coverage for NBC News and MSNBC, was not calling to advocate for her network. She was calling to advocate the DNC's position. She wanted me to wait so they could call state party leaders. The head of the political division was trying to bully me at the behest of the DNC over a dumb scoop. Unquote. Pretty shocking. Now, before you dismiss it as hearsay, keep in mind that Yashar Ali is not a conservative, hardly. He once worked for Gavin Newsom. He was a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. He's not a right-winger. He's the opposite. He has no reason to lie about this. The head political executive at NBC News was doing errands for the DNC. She's a hack. This kind of behavior is par at NBC News. During the last campaign, the chairman of NBC, Andy Lack, leaked the Access Hollywood tape to the Washington Post. Why? Because he wanted to make sure Hillary Clinton won the presidency. Then he lied about it and crushed the career of Billy Bush because he was in the way. A year later, NBC tried to protect Hillary Clinton's close friend, Harvey Weinstein. They tried to kill a story about his sexual assaults, and then they lied about that, too. They got caught. Last fall, when the creepy porn lawyer was making wild gang rape allegations against Brett Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearings, NBC News knowingly sat on evidence that would have cleared Kavanaugh's name, but they didn't release it. If Chuck Schumer demanded the United States invade Belgium tomorrow, NBC News would dutifully produce a report about WMD stockpiles in Brussels. The Walloons are the real threat. Whatever it takes. Hours after Robert Mueller defeated the Russia hoax, Nancy Pelosi commanded the press corps to start covering health care. She said that out loud at a press conference. So CNN immediately scrapped its entire lineup. The next day, every show on CNN from 6 in the morning to midnight, every single one without any exception, repeated Democratic talking points about Obamacare. These are not journalists. These are faithful servants of the Democratic Party. It might be easier if they just admitted it. We all know it. Chris Plante hosts a radio program, The Chris Plante Show, one of the best things ever on radio, and he joins us tonight. We're happy he's here. How exactly would this the mechanics are a little bit confusing to me. How would the director of political coverage at NBC News know that Yashar Ali was working on this story?
Well, she got a call from the DNC, and someone at the DNC, when Yashar Ali called in and said, I've got this scoop, I'm going to rain on your fund for a couple of minutes, they said, well, who do we call to kill this story? And I'm sure they have a long list of people, a phone book of people in the news media, but they chose to call for this purpose Daphna Linzer, who, as you said, is the director of all political coverage for NBC and for MSNBC. And what did she do? Did she say, well, I can't do that. That would be unethical. She dutifully called, at the request of the DNC, a freelance reporter. This is a woman who has great power in the news media. If you're a freelance reporter, NBC and MSNBC are possible sources of revenue for you and for your wife and your children and for their college fund. And Yashar Ali, very much to his credit, took umbrage with her acquiescence to the DNC's call, and he sounded the alarm. Now, he's going to be hurt for this professionally, because Daphne Linzer does not appreciate, and NBC News does not appreciate, that Yashar Ali went public with this, because theoretically, at least, it's embarrassing to them. But the DNC knew. Who do we call? We want to spike this story. How do we put this on ice? Let's call Daphne. She can dangle a little bit of a thread over his head. He's a freelance guy. He can't alienate network people. She's a bigwig. She'll call and put him on ice. She called. Can you imagine doing such a thing?
Well, no, but that's actually the question I was about to ask you. So you're an out-of-the-closet conservative. You do multiple hours every day on your own views. You don't hide your views from anyone.
Right.
And I'm sure you vote Republican most of the time.
I do.
If the RNC called you tomorrow morning
Right.
and said another reporter has a story that's inconvenient to us, will you help kill it? What would you say?
I would laugh in their faces. And it's funny, we were having a discussion about this morning. I do conservative political talk radio. And we were talking this morning, our morning meeting with Bill Hess and Victoria and Michael, about how much higher my standards are as a journalist. I'm not even technically a journalist anymore, but my standards are so much higher. My ethics are so much higher than Daphne Linzer's, and then Joe Scarborough's, and then, shall I continue, Chuck Todd, and the list goes on, and Jim Sciutto, and so many others, that really journalism is dead. And it's, I was thinking about when I was driving over here, Tugger, and you know, I was a journalist for a long time. I worked for CNN for a long time. We
worked
overlapped
there together,
for
yes.
a period of time. I didn't leave journalism. Journalism left me, to paraphrase the great Ronald Reagan. Journalism is just on the ropes, and they're beyond that. They're dead. This thing is so bought and paid for at this point. Every day is a prize fight, and the referee is paid off. He's bought and paid for.
But at a certain point, if a channel gives itself over to the specific instructions of a political party,
yeah,
which I think CNN and NBC News both have.
Yes.
And MSNBC right now is running an infomercial right now as we speak for the Green New Deal. Okay.
Right.
Shouldn't they have to declare that as an in-kind contribution?
Well, I've been talking about that on my radio show also. President Trump brought this up in a tweet about 3 weekends ago, and the news media became apoplectic when he said maybe we should take a look at the FCC licenses of the networks. And my first thought was, well, that's not a great idea. And I thought about it for a day or so, and I said, you know, I've got to tell you, these are political organizations. They're not journalistic organizations, or at least the balance has shifted from being legitimate journalistic organizations that serve a very important function in our republic. You know, these are the guys that are supposed to be calling balls and strikes. And every day it's crooked. Every day. It's not the thumb on the scale; their elbow is on the scale.
No, it's totally corrupt. They're not even hiding.
And corrupt as there is. No, you know, Bernie Goldberg years ago, former CBS News correspondent, wrote a book called Bias. The book and the idea of bias in the media is a quaint notion of a bygone era. The word is corruption.
Right. No, that's exactly. And last thing, NBC leaked its own internal video, the Access Hollywood tape, to the Washington Post. Okay. Yeah. 2 old friends from Harvard, 2 separate news organizations leaked it. They've never faced any penalty for that. They've never had to explain how that happened. No one even mentions it anymore. Why?
They win awards for this. There's no punishment. There's punishment if you leak something that hurt the Democratic Party. There's going to be punishment for Yashar Ali.
No, you're right.
Because he told the truth. One of my favorite phrases of my own is that nothing gets you in trouble in Washington like the truth.
It's true. And for the record, I don't even like Yashar Ali. I never have.
Yeah,
we don't share the same politics. I'm not a fan.
Right. No.
But he's being honest, and he will be punished for it. You're absolutely right.
I'll take the truth wherever it's coming from.
Hey, I will, too. I totally agree with that. Chris Plant, an honest man. Thank you.
Doug.
From Russia to Covington to basic human biology, the left, for some reason, keeps falling for superstitions and conspiracy theories. Why is that? We'll investigate after the break. A huge number of well-known people disgraced themselves during the 2 years of the Russian collusion hoax, but 2 of them stand above the rest. Former CIA Chief John Brennan and former FBI Director Jim Comey. We expect lawmakers to grandstand on flimsy pretexts. That's what they do for a living. We don't expect much of anything from the news media. They're toadies and buffoons. But our most powerful bureaucrats are supposed to be, they need to be impressive. They have a lot of control over this country and the people who live here. We need them to be fair and smart and level-headed. John Brennan has shown himself to be none of those things. During his years serving Barack Obama, Brennan was known mostly for lying. Under Trump, He's become a full-blown, wild-eyed conspiracy nut.
He is feeding and fueling hatred and animosity and misunderstandings among Americans. I use the term that this is nothing short of treasonous because it is a betrayal of the nation. He is giving aid and comfort to the enemy. Treasonous is defined as a betrayal of trust as well as aiding and abetting the enemy. And so that was the word that came to my mind.
Jim Comey, meanwhile, is smarter than John Brennan, not that that's hard. But he's a political partisan, something that no FBI director should ever be. At times, his judgment has been bizarre. Watch him, for example, suggest that the most lurid portions of the obviously fake Steele dossier might in fact be real.
Honestly, never thought these words would come out of my mouth, but I don't know whether the current president of the United States was with prostitutes peeing on each other in Moscow in 2013. It's possible, but I don't know.
These people are a joke. Those are the two most powerful unelected bureaucrats in Barack Obama's government, and you would not hire them to run a CVS. They're idiots. They're self-aggrandizing narcissists who believed an absurd story about a pee tape that ran on some cat blog. And they're not alone. Congressman Adam Schiff is still rambling on like a mental patient about Russian conspiracy.
From the public, you might think it's okay that their only disappointment after that meeting was that the dirt they received on Hillary Clinton wasn't better. You might think that's okay. I think it's immoral. I think it's unethical. I think it's unpatriotic. And yes, I think it's corrupt and evidence of collusion.
Immoral, unethical, unpatriotic. People didn't used to talk like that, particularly those who are already all three. But it's not just Adam Schiff. The rest of his party is already joining the new conspiracy theory, and it's this. Bill Barr, the Attorney General, may look like a decent guy, in fact, a living stereotype of the traditional moderate Republican, but looks deceive. In fact, Barr is an enemy operative, a Putin stooge working secretly for Mother Russia. He cannot be trusted.
For Mr. Barr to quickly issue a 4-page report in his attempt to try and exonerate President Trump has too much of the odor of political expediency to help the man who appointed him, President Trump.
So if Chuck Schumer says that, you can be sure the entire herd of brainless Democratic presidential candidates say it too.
I'm deeply troubled by Barr himself. One of the reasons I voted against him. I mean, he should have recused himself, in my opinion. So I have a lot of problems with Barr.
Do you trust Barr's judgment on obstruction here?
No. I think what the Attorney General did is undermine the purpose of the special counsel's job. And I think Speaker Pelosi is quite right when she says it was not only arrogant, but very disrespectful.
You know, it's really hard to overstate how dumb this is. We're searching for the words. We know a lot about Bill Barr. He's been in the public eye for 40 years. He was the Attorney General under George H.W. Bush. He gave money to Jeb Bush's 2016 campaign. In fact, it's hard to imagine that Barr even voted for Donald Trump. Not his kind of guy. And yet now, for some reason, Bill Barr has developed such a deep loyalty to Donald Trump that he's willing to destroy his own reputation, subvert American government, and commit crimes. Why? In order to help Donald Trump, his new love, hide his criminal Russian collusion. That's what they're telling you. It's ridiculous. It's insane. But they tell you a lot of things like that. With remarkable frequency, the people who are supposed to be the most impressive in our society fall for hoaxes that no normal person would ever believe. Jussie Smollett's transparently bogus hate crime. A dozen more just like it in the past 2 years. The fake Duke rape case, the even faker UVA fraternity rapes. The Covington High School kids. They hated American Indians. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The fraudulent FDA food pyramid that helped make America fatter and less healthy. Eat more breakfast cereal. That'll slim you down. They bought all of this and much more without even pausing. When creepy porn lawyer told them that Brett Kavanaugh was a sex criminal, they believed him. Then they told us that creepy porn lawyer would make a good president. These are the people who brag about how much they revere science. We're the party of science. And at the same time insist that you can change your biological sex by wishing it so. 40 years ago, these same people warned us a new ice age was coming. Now they shriek about global warming. They will literally believe anything. On the left, the Enlightenment is over. Superstition reigns in its place. This is what happens when conventional religion, the ones we all mock, die. People who say, oh, I'm secular, just find something even more implausible to believe in and impose on the rest of us, but with way less self-awareness, and therefore far more dangerously. Brian Dean Wright is a Democrat, a former CIA officer, and he joins us tonight. I can't get past this, Brian. Not that and I know we put clips up of politicians nodding in their bovine way, agreeing with whatever ludicrous conspiracy is out there. But that's what they do. They're not geniuses. They'll say whatever it takes. But the head of the CIA and the head of the FBI ought to be sober, restrained, wise people. And now we know they're not. How did this happen?
Well, you would think that they would have been, but they violated not only their oath to the country, but their oath to fellow officers such as myself. I mean, we are taught very explicitly that you don't violate that line between America's politics and the intelligence community. Brennan and Clapper and Comey, all three of them have done it. But if you step back, I think there are a couple of things happening why Democrats are falling for these kinds of hoaxes. The Brennans and the Clappers, that stuff, that's coup d'etat stuff. If you look at liberal journalists, like why do progressive journalists do this? It's about money, right? It's more of stories about bad orange man mean bigger, clicks and views, and that means bigger money and book deals and so forth, right? And then Democratic politicians, why are they doing it? Well, more of that stuff means more fear. That means panic, hysteria. That brings in donations, and that brings in votes. So that's the short answer to your question. But actually, Tucker, I think there's something bigger happening here that actually is more frightening to me. And that is, as a party, we are telling you through these hoaxes that you are a victim, right? Whether it be the Smollett case, the Covington kids, right? If you are a victim, then you belong to us. And even if you haven't been a victim, you will be at some point. So that, I think, is the underlying issue. Since we have embraced identity politics, we have to get people to the polls based on fear, on panic. And that's the stuff that look, Trump will be gone in 2 or 6 years, right?
Right.
The Democratic Party, what it is creating, its coalition, how it gets people to the polls. If we're telling people that they have to be victims, then we have to believe these stories about Smollett or the Covington kids. That's the issue that's not going to go away, that's going to be part of the Democratic Party, and I hate to say this, but a part of the nation for a generation to come. Because we're telling people, don't think critically, don't think for yourself, just say what you should say when a person of color or a gay person or a woman says that they've been a victim. Just automatically believe them. Stop thinking. That's what the Democratic Party is becoming, and it is horrific.
So what will happen? I mean, we're not at war right now and there's no financial crisis, but we will be and there will be, because that's just the nature of running the world's most powerful country. And so when there is a lot of outward pressure applied on this country and society is really tested, its cohesion is really tested, I mean, what's it going to look like when people immediately retreat into their tribes and rely on conspiracy theories to explain things?
Yeah, you need a national identity to get through those moments.
Yes, exactly.
But I have to tell you, we already are at war. I mean, those of us in the intelligence community know we are in a covert war against the Chinese government. Unquestionably, it's been happening for about 10 years. It's only going to become, a greater and greater, more obvious problem to those who don't know. But I'm telling you, I work with folks in the military, the intelligence community. We all know it's happening. So we have to get ready now for this. It's already happening. So what will occur in the next 5 or 10 years when it becomes more overt? And we have spent the past 2 and how many knows, more years focused on, well, what did the Mueller report really say? And then it was redacted, but so now we need it unredacted. But now, I mean, it's never ending. I mean, we might as well be looking for Hitler and Jimmy Hoffa opening up a bed and breakfast in Argentina. I mean, so that's what we're doing right now. That's what and we're not preparing for the things that matter. And as a Democratic Party, why don't we just put behind the Mueller thing? It's done. It's solved. Now let's have the reasonable conversation of, is Trump the best that we can do for this country now and moving forward? That's a great debate. Right. Let's have that.
It is.
But
and
this conspiracy crap.
It's a winnable debate. He's a Russian agent, not winnable,
yes.
I would say. Brian, thanks very much for that. Very wise. Your point about China is something we should meditate on. Well, the Jussie Smollett saga is getting weirder by the day. The president has gotten involved. Well, Smollett's lawyers say that his attackers, and this is very stealthy, you'll be impressed by this, wore whiteface during the attack. Just another set of muggers in whiteface. We'll have these surreal details ahead.
The the civil rights investigation of Charlottesville as well. So that is just factually false.
Let's take a look. This is the host, Anthony Anderson, who's hosting the NAACP Awards. And at that awards ceremony, Jussie Smollett had previously been nominated for Best Supporting Actor Award. And here's what the host said about that.
I hope he wins. I'm happy for him that, the system worked for him in his favor because the system isn't always fair, especially for people of color.
I think that's very interesting. He said the system worked for him in his favor because the system isn't always fair. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could read into that statement.
Well, it seems like what he's trying to say is that social justice ought to trump individual justice. In other words, he believes the criminal justice system is biased against presumably black people and gay people, and Jussie Smollett happens to be black and gay, and therefore, even though he's obviously guilty by all available evidence and according to the prosecutor's office that just dismissed the charges, he's guilty. Despite that, he should be let off the hook because it's sort of payback for the system not working for other people. That is a fundamental violation of principles of justice. If somebody is guilty of a crime, they ought to do the time, regardless of their intersectional credentials being in order.
Yeah, I just go back to the fact that he's still saying that he was a victim of a hate crime. So I want to know why he's not pressing for an investigation into what happened. His lawyer said this morning that it's possible that the brothers that we saw in this whole story maybe were wearing whiteface underneath the mask that led Jussie Smollett to think that maybe there was a white person that was assaulting him. It just gets crazier.
And my theory of the crime is that it was actually Virginia Governor Ralph Northam dressed in blackface and then dressed in whiteface on top of the blackface. That's my going theory of the crime.
Moving right along. The Economist came after you. They were talking about your book. They did an interview with you on the book, which is, talks a lot about what's happening in the country, about Judeo-Christian values and Greek tradition and subjectivism and individualism and basically the degrading of Western society and the social and political fabric of the country. It's very interesting digging into what your book is about. But they called you the alt-right sage without the rage, and then you got upset about that, justifiably so, for good reason, and then they went back and changed it. They changed it to inside the mind of Ben Shapiro, a radical conservative. What say you?
Well, there's no such thing as a regular conservative. So, frankly, I'm embracing the title. It's like Beto O'Rourke, I'm rad, dude. I can skateboard and everything, brah. But what is amazing about it is to be ignorant enough to call me a member of the alt-right when I have probably been the leading antagonist of the alt-right for at least the last 4 years. I was their #1 target online, according to the ADL in 2016. I still have to hire security to walk me back and forth to synagogue because of the alt-right. To label me that way just demonstrates either the ignorance or the malice of members of the media who don't wish to do a simple Google search.
I mean, there's definitely a fascination with you. When you read this article, they're trying to figure out why you're so popular. Why do kids at college campuses care what this guy has to say? They talk about how you're impeccably dressed and you're sharp in every way. They can't figure out, Ben.
Well, I mean, obviously, it is because of my great handsomeness and physical size. I'm very intimidating, and people are just attracted to me the same way that they would be to Tom Cruise. That's just who I am, and that's what my wife tells me anyway.
As she should. All wives should tell their husbands that. Eric Holder said, I wish we could go back to, the president wants to go back to when America was great. And he sees that as a racist assessment in the president's eyes. You talk a lot about what makes the idea of America great in your book. So what would you say to him about that comment?
I mean, it's an asinine comment. Really, there are two views of the United States. View number one is that the United States is founded on eternal, true, immutable, and good principles. And we haven't always lived up to those principles. But the story of America is that the foundational philosophy of the country is inherently good and rooted in human nature and natural law and God's creation. And that's what American philosophy is about. And again, it's a job of trying to expand that promise to all Americans. And then there's the view of Eric Holder, which is that America was founded on racial hierarchy and that all of these ideas of Western civilization are essentially a facade in favor of perpetuating this evil power hierarchy. Well, if you feel that way, you have to rip up American civilization at its roots. I don't think most Americans believe that. I think most Americans do believe that America has been great in the past. There's no point at which America was, quote unquote, better across the board for everyone. But there are certainly moments in American history that we can point to. Was America not great when we liberated Europe? Was America not great when Martin Luther King was speaking on the Mall in Washington? Was America not great when we were defeating the Soviet Union in the Cold War, or when we were creating such prosperity that 80% of the world's population was lifted out of abject poverty since 1980? It seems like America was great all of those times.
The book is #1, and I'm not kidding. They can't keep it on the shelves. Ben, congratulations. Good to see you as always. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot.
Coming up, President Trump says if Mexico doesn't do their part, he's going to shut down the border as early as next week. And Homeland Security Secretary Carlson Nielsen seconded that today.
We're closing the border. They'll close it, and we'll keep it closed for a long time. I'm not playing games. Mexico has to stop it. We have 2 brand new caravans coming up, if you can believe it, 2 big ones, and they're coming up. And Mexico could stop them very easily, but Mexico is going to have to do something. Otherwise, I'm closing the border. I'll just close the border. So there's a very good likelihood that I'll be closing the border next week, and that'll be just fine with me.
So that's pretty clear. He's threatening to close the southern border next week as the crisis continues to spiral. Mexican officials say that this is the mother of all caravans. Those are their words. And it is heading north. Migrants from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. So far this year, look at the numbers. Daily border crossings are at a 13-year high. On Tuesday alone, more than 4,100 migrants were detained, the highest one-day total in more than 10 years. Officials estimate that 1 million undocumented migrants could be stopped at the border by year's end. So joining me now, Guy Benson and Marie Harf in their studio as the hosts of Benson and Harf. Good to see both of you guys. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Martha.
So, Marie, when you look at those numbers, I mean, does it look, is that hype, or would you consider that to be a crisis or a big problem? How would you characterize it?
Yeah, those numbers are certainly at crisis levels, and you've heard Democrats like Jay Johnson say that today. The problem with closing the border is that you hear from Democrats and Republicans in these border states that it would so hurt them economically because so much of their economy depends on legal cross-border activity, and it actually wouldn't solve the problem. So we need to look at the reasons there's been this uptick, and part of that is going to the origin countries and trying to help them improve their situations. And we have to keep pressing Congress to act. Until they do, though, there is a humanitarian crisis, and we have to figure out ways to take care of these people. We are legally and morally obligated to do so. Closing the border won't solve that problem.
Guy.
Well, the border obviously is not secure. I think it's abundantly clear to all of us, and we need significant increases in border security, first of all. Second of all, I'm glad Marie brought up Jay Johnson. That was President Obama's DHS secretary. He was on another network this morning, and he said, when I woke up, when I was DHS secretary, and I heard that the previous day, had 1,000 or fewer crossings, illegal crossings, that was a decent day. More than 1,000, it was a bad day. He said 4,000, like we saw on Tuesday alone of this week. He said, I cannot imagine. We do not have the resources to deal with this. This is a crisis. And I hope this at least puts an end to the talking point that we've heard from many on the left, that it's a manufactured crisis invented by Donald Trump. No, it's very real, and it's extremely serious.
Yeah, I mean, clearly not a manufactured crisis. All you have to do is look at the people, you look at these numbers, and the fact that, I know that the current Homeland Secretary, Carlson Nielsen, she's traveling to Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. She's trying to work to improve relationships so that they can help their own people, which is a very good sign. But the fact of the matter is that they have overflow at the capacity for the holding centers on the border. And then you've got, families that are being released, people that are being released, and they have nowhere to go, or they have a court date that they're supposed to show up for. It's absolutely untenable in this current situation. And it feels politically like both sides, Marie, benefit too much from this fight to do what the American people want them to do, which is to come up with a new program.
You're right. Congress needs to act, and both sides have been unable to come together. I think both sides have gone to the extremes on this issue, and we have to start looking in the center. One other point, though, Donald Trump and his administration have talked a lot about their hardline rhetoric and their hardline policies being there in large part as a deterrent. And the fact that the numbers have upticked so much and the numbers keep growing shows that they're not working as a deterrent. We need to figure out why this uptick is happening and keep pressing Congress to act.
It's an
while
interesting
taking care
point, because, guys, some people look at this and they say that the family separation policy and then the decision that wouldn't happen anymore, that if you came in with your family, you could get in, has provoked this increase in families rushing towards the border.
Yeah, the incentives here are way out of whack. And I think, it's not arguable anymore. What we have is an unsustainable status quo that can't just continue like this. Our officials along the border, Border Patrol and others, are begging for changes, better border security, and changes, frankly, in the law when it comes to the incentives and our structures for how we deal with these things. Congress has to do something, and it seems like there's paralysis in this town because everyone has their rehearsed talking points on immigration.
Absolutely.
And they seem to get more and crazier and less responsible by the day.
Yeah.
The only thing that can fix this is Congress.
And I think both sides should say, these are our 5 people, and these are your 5 people, and we're going to go into the room, and we're not coming out until we have a plan that everyone can vote on, and we've all agreed on. Good luck. Right. Thanks, you guys. Coming up next, a woman comes forward claiming that she received an awkward kiss from then Vice President Biden 5 years ago. So will these accusations hinder his decision at all about his 2020 chances before he's officially in the race? Chris Starwalt coming up next. Joe Biden facing a bit of controversy tonight. Late today, former Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor of Nevada coming forward to say that she had a bit of an uncomfortable encounter with the then vice president back in 2014. Lucy Flores writes in New York Magazine, quote, "I felt him get closer to me from behind. He leaned further in and inhaled my hair. I was mortified," she writes. "He proceeded to plant a big, slow kiss on the back of my head." Now, Bill Russo, a spokesman for Joe Biden, responded with a statement that reads in part, "Neither then nor in the years since did he or the staff with him at the time have any inkling that Ms. Flores had been at any time uncomfortable, nor do they recall what she describes. But Vice President Biden believes that Ms. Flores has every right to share her own recollection and reflections, and that it is a change for the better in our society that she has the opportunity to do so." Joining me now, Chris Starwalt, Fox News politics editor. Chris, good to see you tonight. Thanks for being here. So, that's not a great moment for the nascent and not yet declared Biden campaign.
Well, and also talk about getting it wrong. Look, the degree to which Joe Biden now obviously misunderstands the political moment in his party should be obvious to everyone. He gave a speech earlier where he was talking about apologizing, but not really apologizing for the treatment of Anita Hill during the Clarence Thomas hearings a generation ago when he was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and she was horribly treated as she came forward to make her accusation. He came out with a very lame explanation and apology for it, and he got the wrath of feminist activists, liberal Democrats, and others. Now we have another accusation that fits within a pattern for Joe Biden that we have seen throughout his career of overdoing it with physical contact with women, strangers, women he meets, women who are there. There was a teenage girl who was present with her family when her father or relative was being sworn into Congress. We have the story of the Deputy Defense Secretary's wife. We've heard these stories before about women who Joe Biden made feel uncomfortable. Now we have another one that his campaign, or as you say, campaign in waiting, doesn't know better than to say, well, we think it's super for her that gals now have a chance to talk about this stuff, but she didn't say anything at the time, so too bad.
Yeah, and here's what she says about that. "For years, I feared my experience would be dismissed. Biden will be Biden. Boys will be boys. But hearing Biden's potential candidacy for president discussed without much talk about his troubling past as it relates to women became too much to keep bottled up any longer." So that's her response. They're going to come back with this, Chris. She tweeted after that campaign event, "Great to be in Nevada with Vice President Biden and Lucy Flores. Don't forget to vote." This is I think she passed this along from Eva Longoria, who was also there on Tuesday, November the 4th.
Look, the moment has changed, and the Democratic Party, you saw what happened with Al Franken. You saw what has gone on as Democrats have gone through this Me Too reckoning and had this discussion, and so is the larger national conversation. Joe Biden is obviously not up to this. He is not ready for this, and I am telling you, this could be a death knell for his potential candidacy. He has not thought through how his dealings with women over the years, including incidents like these, what she is accusing him of is, again, totally in keeping with a pattern of behavior that we've seen in him. If he's got to litigate this now, he better be better at this. He better be ready for a discussion about this.
Chris, he probably says, well, President Trump also had stories that were surrounding him, and he made it.
Yeah, but except for this, Democrats do not want to equivocate on this issue. Again, back to Al Franken. They absolutely 86'd Al Franken. They lit him on fire and dropped him in the bottom of the ocean because they weren't going to have a difficult discussion when it came to Roy Moore from Alabama. They're not going to do it with Donald Trump. I think Joe Biden is in big, big trouble.
Interesting. Chris, thank you. Great to see you.
Bet.
So coming up next, a Fox Nation special investigation into how sex abuse within the Catholic Church snowballed into a full-blown crisis.
How did this wrongdoing occur for so long in secrecy and without any consequence? We will analyze the evidence from the Catholic Church and others involved to reveal how high up the cover-up goes and who is responsible.
Is announcing sweeping new laws today, forcing those at the Vatican to immediately report sex crime allegations to the police. It's the latest move to curb the problem of sexual abuse within the church, which is the subject of a brand new episode of the Furman Diaries on Fox Nation.
You can see it on their face. And you can see how the church not only stole their faith, their virginity, their sexuality, they stole their hope. You're watching something disappear in somebody right in front of you as soon as you bring this subject up.
I was raped and abused when I was 12 years old. I didn't come forward with some of the abuse for 30 years. And we know that most victims are in a similar situation where they suffer alone and in the dark.
It's crushing. Here now, Mark Furman, retired LA detective, Fox News contributor, and host of the Furman Diaries on Fox Nation. Good to see you this evening, Mark. You know, you've covered so many investigations. You've seen so many heinous crimes in your life. When you dug into this subject, what struck you the most? What surprised you about it?
Well, Martha, nothing surprised me because I've been on this case and I've been studying this for over 20 years, long before Boston Globe broke the stories in Boston about the Boston Diocese. But the thing that really strikes me probably the most is the complete absence of punishment. There is really no push to actually stop pedophilia in the Catholic Church, and certainly not from the Catholic Church, from the Pope on down. And certainly it doesn't seem that law enforcement or politicians really have the stomach for it.
The police, I think, is something that for most of us covering this story feels like it should have been the immediate response, you know, back in the 60s when these things first started to come to light. You know, it will be seen as too little too late to some, but perhaps it's a step in the right direction, or no?
Well, I think this new law, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this applies to the Vatican City only, 110 acres, 840 people live there, 32 women and 0 children. So I think it's going to be pretty safe to say they're not going to have to do anything. How about the 1.2 billion Catholics in the world? Pass these laws for them, and then maybe you have something.
Let's play another piece of sound from your excellent piece here on Fox Nation. Watch this.
Bishops around the world referred abusive priests to church-operated treatment centers so they could receive evaluation and care without disclosing their crimes to independent clinics or law enforcement. After priests completed their treatments, they were reassigned to new parishes that had no way of knowing about their abusive past.
So the church would say, Mark, that those were egregious sins of the past, and that the way that they recruit and speak to anyone who wants to be a priest now is markedly different than it was in the 60s and 70s, some 57 years ago.
No, I'd say that that's not true, unless they're willing to actually, I guess, give polygraphs to possible candidates for the priesthood. I think short of that, it's just mouth service. When you look at the system, the bishops are the carrier of the torch. The bishops actually do the cover-up. Well, those bishops become archbishops and cardinals and popes. And Pope Benedict, the pope before Pope Francis, actually ran the office in the Vatican that worldwide all the scandals ran through his office. Then when he became Pope, he claimed he really didn't know anything about the situation, even though he left in his home country of Germany a disastrous pile of pedophile crimes. Pope Francis did the same thing. Pope John Paul did the same thing. claim they didn't know. They left in their country a complete disaster of pedophile priests, bigger than the Boston Diocese scandal.
Mark Furman, the Furman Diaries, it will air this weekend, Fox Nation documentary. Mark, thank you very much. Very important story, and good to have you here. So coming up next.
I'm a United States Senator, and had to get up the courage to walk up to her and ask her for her phone number. And this doesn't make me nervous, but that made me nervous.
Cory Booker dishes on his budding romance with Rosario Dawson. Ladies' night when we come back.